much as the professor, essentially. And so he told me in 3 weeks, there is this guy coming. He invented the two-photon microscopy, which is a famous type of microscopy. You probably get the Nobel Prize for that, but you have to present your project to this person. So
you went, holy cow.
Yeah.
In this episode, I'm talking with Benjamin Bollmann, CEO of Swissnex in Brazil, the Swiss Science Consulate. Benjamin, I'm thrilled to be talking to you, and it sounds like you are still getting settled in your new spot in Sao Paulo. Is that right?
Yes, thank you for having me, Suzanne. So I just arrived a month ago to Brazil, moved from the US East Coast. I was mainly in Boston, but also partly in New York. And I am now in Sao Paulo, on the main avenue of Sao Paulo called Avenida Paulista, which is probably the most famous avenue in South America. I am right next to a very famous museum called MASP, M-A-S-P, that was designed by Lina Bubardi, also probably one of the most famous female architects of the 20th century, a Brazilian modernist architect, and it's a very impressive building right next to us.
Very cool. So I have to ask you those questions you get when you move to a new city and a new place. Number one, have you found a place to live, or are you in sort of that in-between lovely stage of expat apartments?
I am very much in between, looking for an apartment, discovering the Brazilian real estate market. Very different from what I know in the US or in Europe. So, but there is amazing architecture in this city. A lot of building from the 50s, 60s.
Oh, cool.
That have very generous spaces. And, it's really like this tropical modernism in Brazil, where it's basically brutalist architecture, concrete and glass, but very big windows. There's little insulation like we know in Europe because the climate allows for it. So the result is very interesting architecture here.
And has your stuff arrived, or is it still someplace on the boat between Boston and Sao Paulo?
My stuff, as we speak, is probably in the port in Sao Paulo. I'm not sure.
This is progress.
Exactly what it is. I should have put a electronic tracing system or like a tracer to see where it is.
You should have put an air tag in that box.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes,
and you could have tracked it the whole way. That's great. So Benjamin, I always think of you as a and kind of person. You're science and architecture, science and entrepreneurship, science and design, science and innovation. How did you get into this and category? What inspired you to do that? Or why are you interested in connecting all those dots?
Because I'm very curious and I'm interested in a lot of different topics and different countries and how did I get into that? I'm not sure where this curiosity developed. But when I finished my studies at ETH, initially, maybe I should go back in time. And I was first not very good at school when I went to mandatory school in Switzerland. I was mostly interested in skateboarding
Hence
doing a lot of skateboarding and really focusing on skateboarding. I became quite good in skateboarding. I even got a little sponsorship back then from my city. And but the result is that I wasn't focusing on school at all. And I almost ended up in the lowest grade in school where, you cannot even do an apprenticeship or go to high school, or it's very difficult to rejoin the academic track. So at some point, my parents told me you should really focus, and try to get better at school. And so I started studying a bit more, and then, got into a track that allows you to do an apprenticeship, but not to go to high school. So I started with an apprenticeship and I had to choose a topic, a profession to learn, a trade to learn. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in sound and, because I was also DJing at the time, and decided to become a sound engineer. So I
sound engineer. That's cool.
Yeah. So I went on to do an apprenticeship in electronics, electronics engineering. And then realized that I would like to rejoin the academic track instead of going to a applied science university or to start working after my apprenticeship. And so I was able to do a gap year that allows, it's like preparatory school that allows you to rejoin the traditional academic track. It was called Cours de Mathématiques Spéciales at EPFL in Lausanne. And that allowed me to take an entrance exam to ETH Zurich. And so, well, actually, I took the entrance exam to ETH Lausanne first, and they allowed me to start my studies, undergrad studies at ETH in Zurich. So that's how I ended up at ETH in Zurich. But studied at ETH electrical engineering and information technology, and then went on to the US, where I did my master's thesis first in Boston at MIT. And then worked as a research assistant at MIT in the field of neuroscience. So
what got you into neuroscience?
I was just fascinated. I was just curious about the brain and took some classes at ETH and met a professor there who allowed me then to connect with another professor in Boston, and I ended up in this lab. A little bit by chance because Sebastian Song's lab. So he's not anymore at MIT, but he used to be a professor at MIT back then.
And he had that fabulous project where he was doing a game to map out the brain, right?
Yes, exactly. So the big vision there was just to create a map of the brain. Very simple idea. But that doesn't exist. When you want to see how the brain is built at the nano resolution, so at a very detailed resolution, at a resolution that is big enough, high enough to detect single connections between the cells and create a network diagram of the brain. It doesn't exist because it's so complex. The brain is the most complex object in the universe. It's much more complex than the stars or, just in terms of its materiality.
Really? That's wild.
Yeah. And so it's like a big mashup of spaghettis that connect to each other. And so you have long spaghettis and shorter spaghettis, and then one spaghetti can connect to 10,000 other spaghettis. And so you have to really go into the brain at micro nanoscales and then follow the branches and then detect where the connections are if you want to recreate the network diagram of the brain. So it was a very, very difficult technical challenge that we're trying to solve in this lab, developing new AI algorithms to try to automatically retrace the brain from microscope images, essentially. I hear they've mapped the brain of a fruit fly. So that was the big breakthrough. But we're not at the mouse yet, and we're not at the human yet. So there's still a lot of mystery about the human brain, including the most basic information like its architecture.
Very cool. So you did your master's in Boston. You worked with Sebastian Sung. Then you came back to Zurich, right?
Not directly. So, when I arrived in Boston, I had a completely different view of science because I was used to ETH, which is back at the time was quite a Germanic type of institution where you had, the
Herr Professor,
PhD students,
Doctor,
then you had the postdoc, then you had the professor, doctor, etc. And you're considered a student. And, I had this image of MIT that was probably very hardcore, crazy people, nerds working on their scientific problems in their corner. And then I arrived in Boston, and when I stepped into the lab, someone welcomed me with flip-flops in a padding suit, literally, and told me, this is our lab. Here's the drum set. Then the professor arrived, Sebastian, who collects fancy sneakers. So he had like a collection of very shiny sneakers. And then we had this huge displays with basically 3D maps of the brain that looked incredibly fancy. And they were talking about very basic problems like, how can we map the architecture of the brain? What is the most basic thing we can do with this information, etc. Nothing very complicated to understand in terms of the questions they were asking, but incredibly sophisticated answers. But in a very different type of collaborative environment than I was used to at ETH, where it was you were a student, a small master student, but you're expected to contribute as much as the professor, essentially. And so he told me in 3 weeks, there is this guy coming. He invented the 2-photon microscopy, which is a famous type of microscopy. You probably get the Nobel Prize for that, but you have to present your project to this person. So,
holy cow.
Yeah. And then I really discovered this Boston innovative, collaborative mindset at MIT. There were guest speakers from all over the world. We were talking about economics, things that have nothing to do with neuroscience, but that may inspire some ideas for the problems we're trying to solve.
Right.
And there was this openness, super inspiring place. And also I met a lot of people who were interested in surfing, who were interested in design, and were also scientists. And I discovered that science can be cool for the first time.
I love that. Science can be cool. Well, that is a really good takeaway. So it sounds like that was an inspiring time. It sounds like you finished your thesis and you published it. And you came back to Zurich and you went, oh gosh, I can't stand this. Or what happened then?
No, so when I was at MIT, I saw different types of images of the brain that we were trying to compare to see what made with different types of microscopy, and it was really inspiring to me to see the interior of this mysterious thing that is the brain, that is creating our minds and consciousness. Right. And I thought it's the first time humanity can see inside. And we should really show this to the outside world, because this is quite unique. And I was also inspired by my context, by my environment. And so I had the idea to create a public exhibition about the brain that would allow you to step into the brain to see inside.
Oh, that's great.
I went back to Zurich and I pitched this idea to the University of Zurich. And at the time, on the side, I was also interested in architecture, and so I called it Neural Architectures, the exhibition. The University of Zurich hired me during 6 months to create this exhibition, and I did it inside the main hall of the University of Zurich. We had a nice structure by an architecture office in Zurich, quite famous, that did the Haarbrücke train station. And so we had projections on the wall of growing and on the floors of growing neurons and backlit images. And it wasn't like a science exhibition that tries to explain new things, but it was really trying to get you inside the brain. And the NZZ, the newspaper in Zurich, did an article about that, which Swissnex in San Francisco saw and invited me to do the exhibition then in San Francisco. That's how I got to know Swissnex in 2010. But San Francisco, I went there in 2015 for the first time, full time. Started as an employee of Swissnex in 2015 in San Francisco. So 5 years.
And then you moved out to Boston, and then you moved down to Sao Paulo. And now you have done the impossible, which is you have one website for all the Swissnex around the world, which I was very impressed at.
Yes, so Swissnex is a very Swiss organization in the sense that it grew in a very bottom-up, organic manner. Yeah. So the first Swissnex was actually created in Boston in the year 2000. It was called SHARE back then, for Swiss House for Higher Education and Research. And then very quickly also a Swissnex location opened in San Francisco, but with a different CEO, with a slightly different take on what Swissnex could do, a different name as well. So San Francisco was the location that came up with the name Swissnex. And then there was a Swiss house in Singapore, which is now closed, which also became a Swissnex, and then India and China, Japan now. So the network grew organically. It's the strength of Swissnex is that it's very adapted to the local environment, and so naturally it took on different flavors at different locations, different even accounting systems, and way of working. But with the years, we've really consolidated the network, and that's something we are still trying to do every day, to really work more and more together and offering kind of a global gateway for our Swiss partners all at once.
So how do you handle working towards a global gateway of collaboration.
Yeah, sometimes it's not about the topics, it's also about the way we frame our offerings. So one of the things Swissnex does, among others, is to support Swiss startups to go abroad, discover foreign markets, explore foreign markets, and then eventually enter foreign markets. That Switzerland is a very small economy, and we're a very export-driven economy, and so at some point, if startups want to grow, they really need to go abroad and find investments and clients abroad. And so that's something we're trying to help. And so there, for example, we have a global program that allows the startups to pick their location, their markets of choice, and then come to visit Swissnex. And so, of course, we work differently on different markets then. So that's one way to do it.
So, Benjamin, how did your time at the ETH impact what you're doing? Did it give you a different framework? Did it provide a different kind of discipline? What difference did it make that you had gone to the ETH?
A lot. I come from the French side of Switzerland, obviously, next to Lausanne in Morges, and decided to study at ETH in the German side of the country in Zurich.
You crossed the Rüstigraben.
I crossed the Rüstigraben. And so what ETH allowed me is to learn German, to discover my family roots in Zurich, because I have family roots in Zurich. And then to create a life in Zurich. So I consider Zurich my home in Switzerland. That's where I met my life partner, and then that's where I went to study, and then continued working afterwards. And so it's really changed my life in that way, my private life as well as my professional life, because I studied at ETH, which then allowed me to go to MIT, which then allowed me to develop the kinds of activities I'm doing today, and this relationship with first relationship with Swissnex, which allowed me to get my current job. And so ETH was very transformative in that way. If I'm honest, I went to ETH in the first place because I wanted to study and learn German, and because I saw that ETH was higher ranked than EPFL. And one of my big goals was to go abroad. I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to go to the US. And so I said, I may have a better chance of going abroad if I study at ETH than if I study at EPFL, which was probably wrong. But that's how I decided in the first place. The studies itself, if I may be a little bit critical, it was very... I got a little bit disillusioned with STEM studies because, they provide you with a lot of problems to solve. You have a lot of homework where you have problems after problems that have a single solution. And the typical math problems and engineering problems.
Right.
And we weren't exposed to that many open-ended problems where you have to have a creative response or design response to them. And when you enter the real world, that's what you are confronted with,
Life is not full of simple solutions.
Yeah, there is not one solution out there. And so you need to decide based on your values, based on the context, which way you go and which solution you want. And that's not something I learned that much at ETH. That's something I learned much better. So I don't know how it is nowadays. Probably they have more project-based learning and than back at my time, and team learning, etc. But that's something I would have loved to see more in my studies at ETH. I was also very inspired by the American model, which is much more open than the Swiss model, where, if you study at MIT, you can do a major in computer science and a minor in design. ETH, I'm not sure, maybe it's possible today, but it was very difficult for me to, let's say, study in the architecture department when I was studying electrical engineering as an undergrad. And so I lacked a little bit that interdisciplinarity that I love and that I'm trying to see every day now at Swissnex.
You didn't see the and.
Yeah, I didn't see the and too much. I learned to design antennas and silicon chips. Yes.
Very good. I'm sure it has there's a benefit to that. Benjamin, thank you. That was a great conversation. I really appreciated your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This was a fascinating conversation with Benjamin Bollmann, CEO of Swissnex Brazil. But stay tuned, because there's more to come. On this special occasion, in alignment with Earth Day, we're going to publish the second part of this conversation in 3 weeks. And in this next part, we're going to continue the conversation and focus on the pressing issues around climate change, on the importance of the upcoming Global Climate Conference, COP30 in Belém, Brazil, and the historical relationship between Switzerland and that particular city, and the role that the country can play in global sustainability. We're also going to talk through Benjamin's vision around the future of Swissnex and its role in fostering innovation and collaboration, and its position at the nexus of science, innovation, and sustainability. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. You can find We Are ETH on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or whatever platform you listen. And please give us a good rating if you enjoyed today's conversation. I'd like to close by thanking our producers at ETH Alumni and at LE Media, and especially to thank you, our listeners, for joining us today. See you in part 2.